Right, okay, year 11. This is the walking talking mock for paper 1. The idea of this is I'm just going to go through an example paper. I've written my own answers to every question, so you can pause the video, you can have a read. I'll try to cover a little bit of knowledge, but it's mainly going to be exam technique based, and the idea is the day before, a couple of days before, or the morning of, you watch this video, and it makes you feel better about the exam that you're going to sit. First things first, you wouldn't have seen this paper before because I've predicted questions that have never come up. There's not guarantee they'll come up, the odds are they won't, but it's better than just doing a mock past paper of questions that have already been answered. So first thing to note is you've got 80 minutes for paper 1, so you have an hour and 20 minutes, and let's get into it. So very first question, it asks you to describe one feature and you have to do it twice. So for this question, you want 2 sentences per feature. So you want your first sentence to be a feature, and then your second sentence to be a fact that backs it up. So I've got one feature of the trench system. The trench system in World War I was the idea there were 3 lines of trenches, the front line, the support, and the reserve, and they are linked by communication trenches. And for this question, I've done one feature of the trench system is the front line trench. So that is my feature. I will then need a fact about the front line trench. So I've said it's the most advanced position and soldiers will spend 15% of their time there. So I've got a feature and I've got a fact. 2 sentences, that will get me 2 out of 2. The second one is describe one feature of the regimental aid post. The aid post is part of the evacuation route. So the evacuation route begins with stretcher bearers. Then they go to the regimental aid post, then they go to dressing stations, then they go to a casualty clearing station, and lastly, they end up in a base hospital. So because the aid post is at the start, that means they would not deal with many serious injuries. It'd be very minor. So I've put one feature, it was the first point of medical treatment, and that is my feature. And then for my fact, I've said it was set up just behind the front line and there was a medical officer and stretcher bearers who provided basic first aid to treat minor injuries. So again, fact backs up the feature. That is all you need for question 1. Question 2 is a usefulness question, which means you get given 2 sources A and B, and you need to tell me why are the sources useful for a specific inquiry? This year, the inquiry I've given you is conditions that required medical treatment on the Western Front. It is so important that you make sure you focus on what the question is asking you. Don't just tell me why the source is useful for a random reason. It needs to be why the source is useful for medical treatment. So your whole answer should be about medical treatment. For this question, you need 2 paragraphs, one for source A and one for source B. You don't need to compare the sources at all, and you need to focus on why they are useful sources. We will never give you sources that are not useful, so you need to focus on what makes them useful. For this question, you need 3 things, basically. You need source analysis, so you need to analyze the source. You need own knowledge to back up the source, and then you need to consider provenance. Provenance is the type of source it is. Is it a diary entry? Is it a newspaper? Is it a medical record? Is it an interview? And why does that make it useful? Your teacher may teach you to do SPO, SOP. It really, really doesn't matter how you do it as long as you hit those 3 things. The way I like to do it of late is this, which basically just means I start by my source analysis, then I give some own knowledge. Then I look at the caption being the provenance. So is it a diary entry? What year was it written? And then I go back to my own knowledge again. I like doing it twice just to make sure I've got enough own knowledge in the answer. I've got the sources on the back sheet here. So remember the question was about treatment. So the first source I've got, and again, you can pause it if you want to read it in more detail, is about PTSD. And it mentions here that treatment for PTSD is rest and comfort for those who need it to prepare them for return to the front line. And this is seen as sufficient forms of treatment. This source is a report about shell shock by the War Office Committee published in 1922. And we'll come on to that when we analyse the source later. Source B, I've got a photo that shows soldiers performing first aid during a gas attack. So it's a photo. It's during the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. And in the picture, it's quite difficult to see, but you've got soldiers wearing these gas masks made out of cotton pads, and we'll get to that in a little bit as to why. And also you've got a soldier here being given oxygen. So the oxygen he's being given is the treatment for a gas attack. So how do we actually construct this answer? If I go back to the question, to make it easy, I'll put these strands into different colors. So every time I analyze the source, I'll do it in this color. Every time I give some own knowledge, and then every time I give provenance, I'll do it in a different color as well, just so you can see the different strands. So source A is useful for an inquiry into the conditions that required medical treatment. Always begin with the question. Remember, the question is medical treatment, so this is why it's useful. Don't just say source A is useful. Tell me why it is useful, okay? And always mention the question there. So we'll start with our source. So we give a quote. The source states that shell shock, rest, food, and reassurance were sufficient forms of treatment. Why is that useful? Well, it tells us that it means that they weren't really concerned about shell shock, because if you were really concerned, they would give you more treatment than just rest and food and reassurance, just telling you it's okay. So they recommended minimum treatment because it wasn't treated seriously. So that's my source analysis. I now need own knowledge to back it up. Well, what do I know about shell shock? Well, I know it was called MYD.M, not yet diagnosed nervous. I know that many sufferers of shell shock were seen as cowards. People believed they were just trying to get out of war rather than actually being a serious mental illness. So I know that the treatment was very basic. All those things are from my own knowledge. Now we'll go to the provenance. So it was from the War Office Committee in 1922. The War Office Committee is a government body. Why would that be useful? Well, it's going to be accurate. It's going to be reliable. It's going to tell us exactly what the government thinks at the time about shell shock. So I have said source A is useful as it was a report published by the War Office Committee about the treatment, which makes it useful for how it was treated, as the report was written in 1922 after the war had ended. So it's useful, it's written after the war, so it's not going to be biased during the war. And then I've got some own knowledge again, and I've put for my own knowledge supports this, as I know that the War Office Committee was an official government body, therefore it's useful as it reflects an official government policy. So you go through it like so. I'll race through the second one really quickly, doing the same thing. Again, it's useful for medical treatment. What can I see in the picture? Gas masks made of cotton pads, and I can see first aid. I can see them giving oxygen. Why do I know? Sorry, actually, I can't see them giving oxygen. I can see them giving first aid. My own knowledge tells me that they're giving oxygen, and I know from my own knowledge as well that this is a chlorine gas attack, because chlorine gas was the first gas used in April 1915. Then it was phosphine gas, and 2 years later it was mustard gas in 1917. So I said this soldier is a victim of a chlorine gas attack. That is own knowledge because it doesn't say it in the source. Chlorine gas causes respiratory damage. Again, own knowledge because it doesn't say it in the source. Now, the source itself was a photo from 1915. So again, I've said the source is useful because it's a photo taken in 1915. Well, why is a photo a useful source? It gives us direct evidence of the physical conditions, but the question's about treatment. It gives us direct evidence, first-hand experience of the treatment given to gas attacks. My own knowledge supports this. Again, I'm finishing with knowledge, as I know that the Second Battle of Ypres was the first time gas was used in the war. Therefore, if you think about it, that means they're not going to have proper gas masks because it's the first time it's been used, which is why they are wearing cotton pads instead of gas masks. And the source is useful because it shows us how gas was treated, but it's only from 1914. So that doesn't mean that gas is always treated the same way, because it's from the start of the war. That is the source usefulness question. It's quite technique heavy. The most important thing you do is make sure you hit these 3 strands. At the very least, make sure you hit these 2. You will not do very well if you don't at least analyze the source with own knowledge. The obvious misconception I see is people not focusing on the question. If the question is about treatment, focus on treatment. Don't tell me why the source is useful for other reasons. Tell me exactly what the examiner wants you to know. Then we get onto this horrible little question. The idea of this is that you are investigating one of the sources further, either source A or source B, to investigate whatever the question is about. Again, in this case, it's investigate or inquire about medical treatment. The way you want to answer this is I want you to imagine that you are actually going to find out more about source A. What are you going to look at? So the first thing says detail in source A. All you do here is you tell me something from source A to do with medical treatment that you want to investigate. So if it's a quote, you simply write the quote. I want to investigate rest, food and comfort. If it's a picture source, I want to investigate the cotton pad he is wearing. I want to investigate the gas mask he is being given. You simply choose something from the source. So I have chosen this quote here. So this is a quote. In most cases, rest, food and reassurance are sufficient forms of treatment. This is my detail. So detail means something from the source, and read the source carefully. This is where it gets tricky. I need to ask a question. My question must be about what I can see, but it must also be about medical treatment. So I'm not going to ask a question that's unrelated to medical treatment. I care about medical treatment. So this says here that soldiers were given rest, food and reassurance. So I'm asking, what symptoms of shell shock did the soldiers show on the Western Front that required medical treatment near the front line? So the question I'm asking is, what symptoms of shell shock, so how did people know they had it, that then required medical treatment? I am using my detail and I'm investigating medical treatment. These are quite easy marks if you follow this technique. As long as you choose something from the source and as long as you ask a related question that is about this and about your quote, you will be fine. Now you need a type of a source. A source is not Google, a textbook, your phone, your teacher, your friend. A source is a primary source, something that happens at the time. So think things like hospital records, RAMC records, army records. These are all sources at the time. You also have things like journals, diary entries, letters. All of these are sources from the time. And you need to choose the source that you think will accurately answer this question, the question that you have asked. When you consider your source, I want you to consider three things. I want you to consider the time of your source, the place of your source, and can you even give me a person? And I'll show you what I mean by this. So if I was asking for a journal, I wouldn't just write journal. If I want to find out a question about, say, a surgeon, I would want a surgeon's journal. So I would want a surgeon's journal. If I was finding out something about the start of the war, let's say trench foot, I might use 1914. I might want to look at a surgeon from the front line, for example. So to answer my question of the symptoms of shell shock that needed treatment, I think medical records or hospital records are going to give me a good answer here. So I have said medical records as my source. Medical records are just the records of all the soldiers and their medical history. But if I was to go into a library and ask for every single soldier's medical record, that would take me a long time. My question is about the front line. So I'm only going to look at medical records from a dressing station. I'm not going to give a time because I don't know what year would be best suited. So I'm going to have to look at all of the years. I'm not going to give a person because you can't look at medical records for one soldier or one surgeon. So I'm only going to choose a place for this one, a dressing station. But I don't want you to just write, I would use a photo. I would use a diary entry. I would use a letter. That's not enough. You need to give me a source and then you need to give me a little bit more information. I've said medical records from a dressing station. The last bit is you explain, and this bit's actually quite important because sometimes examiners will not accept this answer unless you've explained it. So why would a medical record from a dressing station tell me the symptoms that require treatment? Well, I've said medical records, they will show real examples of the conditions that were treated. So a medical record might say, for example, soldier X had to be treated because he was showing severe signs of shell shock, such as shaking and unable to sleep. I would then look at a vast number of medical records and eventually I would be able to answer my question. Make sure your question is realistic. Make sure it is linked to your detail, and the most important thing for all of this is it links to the question, required medical treatment. Once you've done that, that is the first 16 marks completed, and that is all of the World War stuff section completed. However, you can bring up World War One in any questions about modern medicine later on. So this is what we call section B, which is your normal medical section. Section B starts with a nice, simple 4 marker. You are going to get given 2 time periods. So time period A and time period B. So 2 separate time periods. You are going to get asked one way that they are either similar or different. So they're going to pick a theme, cause, prevention, treatment, and then ask you for a similarity or a difference. In this case, the question I've got is one way in which treatment of disease, so treatment, the idea that if you're sick, you need to get better, how do they treat you, was different. So I need to explain something that's different in the 16th century, which is the 1500s, so the Renaissance, from ideas about treatment in the 20th century. So what I need to do is think this question is Renaissance and modern. I need one way that they treated illness that is different. So I think, okay, in the Renaissance, how did they treat people? They would treat people to do with the 4 humours. They might take your bloodletting. Do they do that in modern? No. Therefore, it's different. So let me think of a different form of modern treatment. Let's do something to do with high technology. Let's pick radiotherapy. Did they do radiotherapy in the Renaissance? No. So these are different. And the way you answer this is you basically do a checklist. You tell me, what did they think in time period A? What did they think in time period B? And why they are different. If the question's similar, you do the exact same. But rather than find things that are different, you find things that are similar. So let's say the question was actually 16th century and the Middle Ages. Well, they both do bloodletting then. So then you would write bloodletting for both of them, but you still have to explain it. Don't just write they do the same thing. You won't get the marks. To get 4 out of 4, you must talk about both time periods. You have to talk about both, and you have to explain only one way, not 5 ways, not 3 ways, that they are either different or similar. So this is how I would do it. I would start with time period A. So time period A. In the 16th century, treatment, again, the question, treatment, was based on the 4 humours. Explain it. It was based on the 4 humours because they had no scientific knowledge, and they treated people by purging or bloodletting to balance the humours. So I've explained time period A. Now I'm going to explain time period B. Doctors have more scientific knowledge and better technology. Therefore, they use high-tech treatments such as radiotherapy to treat cancer by shrinking tumours inside the body. And then I finish up with a tiny explanation as to why they are different. They're different due to technology and scientific knowledge. The key here is both time periods. So make sure you know your time periods and make sure you focus on the question. Is it a difference or is it a similarity? Is it treatment? Is it prevention? Is it cause? And make sure you explain why. Moving on to your final 2 essays at the end. I've asked pretty tricky questions here deliberately. There's no point me giving you an easy question. I want you to hopefully learn something from this as well as knowledge. So I've given the question, explain why public health, always explain why, by the way, always. Explain why public health, could be anything to do with public health, improved in the industrial period. So you have to know your time periods. The industrial period, it's specifically asking from 1750 to 1900, this question. And it wants to know why public health has improved. They always give you 2 bullet points. Just be aware that these bullet points may not be paragraphs, they may just be facts. They might be information, they might be a different thing. So what I think about is before I start writing, you need to plan. So this question requires 3 different reasons why. And the way we teach you to do 3 different reasons why is that means 3 PEE paragraphs. You don't need an introduction, you don't need a conclusion, you just need 3 reasons why public health got better. So the first thing I do is, in my head, I'd think, well, what do I know about public health? That's just the health of the public. So I know that there were 2 public health acts, one in 1848, one in 1875. And I'm using that to help me. I know that Louis Pasteur did germ theory. I know that Robert Koch expanded on germ theory. I also know that in this time period, the health of the public got better because John Snow removed the cholera at the water pump. I also know that there was a sewer system as well built. So I want to try and think, what do I know? How many facts have I got? You could go further. There was a report by Chadwick as well, written about the poor public health. And then I would plan it like this. You might not necessarily write this out. You might think this up in your brain. I would then write down, well, what are my 3 actual points going to be? And you want your 3 points, so your P, to be big factors. Your point must be broad. It must be good. If you make your point Louis Pasteur, that means you can only talk about Louis Pasteur. But if you make your point germ theory, that means you've got more to talk about because you can talk about Louis Pasteur and you can talk about Robert Koch. If I made my point the Public Health Act of 1848, so if I copied that, that means I can only talk about that Public Health Act. I'm probably better off, I've linked these 2 together, linking the 2 Public Health Acts together, and maybe even calling the paragraph government, because government are the most important reason why the Public Health Act is passed. They passed it. My third reason, I want to mention John Snow maybe. I still got him to mention. I still want to mention the sewer system. What's his name? Joseph, I can never pronounce his surname. Joseph Bazalgette. Maybe I'll mention someone else like Chadwick. So I might just call this paragraph key people or individuals. That is my point. Once I've listed my point, let's say germ theory, I then need facts to back it up. If you've got time, you might want to throw a few facts on the piece of paper before you start writing. For example, Louis Pasteur, 1861, the Government Public Health Act. You might not have time for that. I appreciate sometimes you're against the clock. What you then need is evidence. Evidence is the basis of history. It just means straight up facts. You must know stuff. They give you 2 facts here, use them, but you've also got to know stuff. And then what you've got to do is this is the important bit, answer the question. The question is, why did public health improve? So you need to explain why your facts answer the question, because facts do not answer questions. So give me some facts and then explain them. Again, I'll run through this very quickly, but you can pause it. You can read through the paragraphs in your own time. So let's start with germ theory. Germ theory is my point. Easiest sentence starters in the world. One reason why public health improved. I'm just answering the question. Now I need facts about germ theory. Well, okay, fact. In 1861, Louis Pasteur proved that microorganisms cause disease. This proved the idea of spontaneous generation wrong. This gave us a scientific explanation for germ theory. Another fact. In 1876, Robert Koch found out that specific germs cause specific diseases. He was able to isolate germs by staining them a specific colour. So now I have given some quite good facts. You can see I've got dates, 1861 for Louis Pasteur, 1876 for Robert Koch. I've got what they did. He identified specific germs. He found that germ theory was real, or a real thing, and proved the idea of spontaneous generation wrong. This was the idea that germs just spontaneously appeared. Now what we need is, well, why does that make public health better? If people know that germs exist, why is that going to make public health better? So I'm going to explain it. Well, what it does is that means they understand that miasma is wrong. And now they know, well, if germs cause disease, we should stop the spread of germs to improve public health. The government is then going to invest in public health. The public are going to ask the government, we want changes, because we know that if you give us better public health, we will feel better and we'll have a healthier public. So I've explained how germ theory improved public health. English sometimes teach you PEEL. If you want to end with a nice little sentence, linking back, that's also very useful. So therefore, germ theory, my point, improves public health. Let's race through the next ones nice and quickly, but use them. You can, again, pause it and read through my knowledge, or rewind it and go back through if you want a little bit more. So my next point is government. My facts are, because more people could vote in Britain, the government started to take public health more seriously. For example, the Public Health Act of 1848 encouraged a general board of health. It encouraged local boards to install water supplies, but it only encouraged it, and many people ignored it. So what the government then did was they passed a second Public Health Act. This is now compulsory. You must do it. So local authorities had to provide clean water. They had to provide drainage. They had to get their streets clean, just like we do today with bin men. They had to dispose of wastes. So I've got lots of good facts. I've said here that the government was moving from a laissez-faire, meaning they were ignoring people, to a more active role. But now I need to explain, all right, there's proper drainage. Okay, there's clean water. Okay, the streets are cleaned. But tell me, why does that improve public health? Well, when you have street cleaned, when you have drainage systems, when you have waste removal, you improve the sanitation. You improve the living conditions. If you do that, you reduce the spread of disease. The cleaner streets, the better the drains are, the less disease will spread. So things like cholera do not spread anymore. Therefore, the government improved public health. Last paragraph's a little bit more tricky because it's quite a tough question, this one, as I mentioned. But other reasons why public health improved was key individuals. What key individuals am I talking about here? You may not know this one. It's quite a specific fact. But Edwin Chadwick in 1942, he wrote a report that said that sanitation and overcrowding were causing disease. The one you probably will remember is John Snow in 1854. He showed that cholera was spread through water and not miasma. And lastly, Joseph Bazalgette constructed 1,100 miles of sewer in London between these time periods, which got rid of all the sewage from the Thames. Why, once again, does this improve public health? Well, they forced the government to act. They led to the first Public Health Act, which improved public health, led to the removal of the Broad Street pump, which improved public health in Soho, and the sewer system removed sewage from the streets, which reduced the spread of disease, and once again, I've linked back, improved public health. The key for this paper is to always focus on the question. That's your 12 marker done. One final question we're going to look at together. So you get a choice here. Don't answer both of them. You get a choice. Question 5 or question 6. These are 16 mark essays, not 12 mark essays. So you still have 3 reasons, just like you do in your 12 marker, but this time you're going to have an introduction and a conclusion. And the reason why is because you have to make an argument. How far do you agree? Do you strongly agree that this sentence is true? Or do you agree to a limited extent, maybe not very much, that this sentence is maybe not fully true? So this is your opinion. You need to state your opinion very clearly at the beginning. You need to keep your opinion throughout. And then you need to, again, repeat your opinion. If you change your mind, your actual opinion, halfway through an essay, do not actually change it in your essay. Just stick to the same opinion, even if when you're writing it you think this is nonsense, because it's really important you do not change your opinion. The way you would plan this is you draw a table. You need a point, just like the previous question, that agrees and points that disagree. So you might have more than one point here, you might have more than one point here, but you need something that agrees and something that disagrees. You need to weigh up both sides of the argument and then come to an opinion. What we'll do is I've given you the essay for this one, but I'll also plan this one with you as well, just in case any of them come up. You never know. These questions have not come up before, so maybe they will. So this question is, the discovery of genetics, so genetics, was the most important discovery in ideas about the cause of illness from 1800 to present. So you've got to think about all the types of discoveries about cause of illness from the industrial and modern, and what was the most important. The question is giving you paragraph 1. Your agree is going to be genetics. And little note here, they'll always give you a bullet point to help you with your agree point. They will also give you a bullet point to help you with your disagree point. So they've given me the fact germ theory. I actually like germ theory as a whole point because I think that's just as important, if not more important. So I'm going to put germ theory. I now want to try and find a third reason why people think they get sick. The other thing about this question is because there's 2 time periods common, I want to try and hit both time periods. I've done that. That's industrial and that's modern. So I can pick whatever I want. I'm going to go with the one that we often forget. What do we know causes illness? Our lifestyle. If we live a healthy life, we're less likely to get ill. So now I've got my reasons, I need to make an argument before I start writing. I call this my criteria. What I mean by that is, if I think this is the most important, I need to say why. If I think this is the most important, I need to say why. Or this. Personally, I think germ theory is the most important idea about the cause of illness. The reason why is because knowing that people have hereditary diseases from genetics doesn't really cure a huge amount of lives immediately. Whereas when you know about germ theory, that can lead to better surgery, safer sanitation, safer hygiene, which saves lives immediately. I think lifestyle is important, but it doesn't save as many lives as something like germ theory has. So my criteria is going to be that germ theory is the most important because it saves the most lives. Therefore, I don't agree with this statement because I don't think it's genetics. So I'm going to say in my essay that I agree to a limited extent. I can understand where the statement is coming from, but I don't really agree, only to a limited extent. You could just say I disagree with the statement. Let's have a look at how you'd actually do this in practice. So I'll do the same as before with P, E, E in different colours. So I start off in my introduction. I've got to give my answer. My answer is, I agree to a limited extent that the discovery of genetics was the most important. Why do I only agree to a limited extent? And I've said, well, genetics is important, but it's not as important as germ theory is more important as it led to improvements in surgery, which saved millions of lives. So instantly, you know what my answer is. What I now need to do is stick to that argument throughout. If I follow my plan, I'm going to start with the agree point, which is genetics. So I agree to a limited extent that genetics was the most important discovery. And I've said it was important, it just wasn't the most important. So let's give some evidence. What do we know about genetics? In 1953, DNA was discovered by Crick and Watson. Science now understands hereditary diseases. They know that things like diabetes can get passed down from parent through their genes. They then set up the Human Genome Project, not Crick and Watson, but world leaders, in 1990, which maps the purpose of each gene. So we now know if someone's born with a problem, we know that it could be because there's problems with their chromosomes. They've been born with it. It's not just germs or germ theory. So now, why is this important? It's important because doctors can identify genetic disorders, and sometimes we can tell if people have a high chance of developing cancers, and we can even sometimes prevent diseases now by identifying particular genes in their DNA. However, I'm going to repeat my opinion. I still don't think it's as important as germ theory because it did not save as many lives because a lot of hereditary diseases cannot be treated. So now I'm going to get to my actual argument, paragraph 2. I think germ theory is the most important. The discovery of germ theory is the most important discovery. So now I need some facts about germ theory. We already mentioned these earlier on in the previous question, so I'll run through these very quickly. Germs cause disease. Germs in the air were causing liquids to go off. He proved it with milk. This got rid of miasma, got rid of spontaneous generation. Robert Koch developed it further. He identified specific bacteria, such as anthrax, in 1876. Now, once again, I need to explain, but unlike a 12 marker, I don't just need to explain why germ theory matters. I need to explain why germ theory is more important than DNA by Crick and Watson or genetics. So I'm going to say it's important because it led to vaccinations. It's important as it led to development such as antiseptics, which has led to aseptic surgery and saved many lives. Therefore, I think germ theory has had a greater impact on medicine than the discovery of genetics. Remember my criteria? Because it saved many lives. Last paragraph is on lifestyle factors. So we can also talk about some lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors that we now know that your lifestyle is linked to disease. For example, smoking is linked to cancer and heart disease. Drinking too much is linked to kidney problems. So now I'm going to explain the importance again. Sorry, that was meant to be an orange. Explain the importance again. I agree to a limited extent. Lifestyle factors had a greater impact on medicine as people know that by living healthier lifestyles, they are less likely to develop certain illnesses. All I do now is repeat my opinion. My opinion is what? That germ theory has a bigger impact than genetics. Therefore, I only agree to a limited extent. Why do I think germ theory is better than genetics? Because germ theory improves surgery. I just say the same as my introduction. Look, germ theory had a greater impact. Therefore, I agree to a limited extent. Why? It led to things like aseptic surgery, which saves many lives. So I think germ theory is more important than genetics because we can't treat many hereditary diseases, whereas germ theory saves many lives. So a 16-mark question is essentially a 12-mark question, 3 reasons, but they must agree or disagree with the statement. And the important thing is here, you must have an opinion and you must stick to your opinion. Do not change your opinion. I'll give you a second question, just in case it comes up. You never know. This question's not come up before. Let's say they ask you about there was little progress, meaning there wasn't a great deal, little being not much, in medicine during the Renaissance. So do you think there was a lot of progress or not much progress? If you agree that there was little progress, that's going to be your agree point. If you disagree, you're going to think there was a lot of progress. So I might give some evidence for this. I might do a I'll do this very quickly because I want to finish up. I might do a paragraph on there wasn't a lot of progress actually because the old ideas remained the same in the Renaissance. What do I mean by old ideas in medicine? People still believed that God made you sick. People still believed that the 4 humours made you sick. People still believed in miasma. So I'm saying there's little progress. Well, what about the disagree? Now I need something to prove there was actually progress. So I might talk about medical knowledge being better. For example, Vesalius came up with the idea of human anatomy in 1543. William Harvey came up with the idea of blood circulation. William Harvey came up with the idea of blood circulation in 1628, I believe. So we've now got Vesalius anatomy, Harvey blood circulation. I'm going to give another paragraph that disagrees, because I can also talk about new ideas being spread. For example, the scientific group called the Royal Society in the 60s, or 1660s that is, set up new ideas, and their new ideas were spread by the printing press. However, overall, did people listen to these ideas still, or did these new ideas, medical knowledge, get rid of these? They didn't get rid of them. People still believe in old ideas. So this time, I actually do agree that there was little progress because I don't think a great deal changed. So my criteria this time would be that I agree to a strong extent, whereas the previous answer, I agreed to a little extent. And my criteria would be that even though there were these changes did not radically change treatments. If you were sick in the Renaissance, yes, they might know about the Royal Society. Yes, they might know about the printing press. Yes, they might know about anatomy. But at the end of the day, what would they tell you to do most of the time? They tell you to pray. They tell you to balance your 4 humours. Or they tell you to prevent miasma from spreading to stop yourself getting sick. So I agree to a strong extent, and my criteria is they didn't radically change treatment. Whereas this question, I actually disagreed. So I agree to a limited extent because I believed it was germ theory. Right, I would recommend if you go back through that a few times, you might want to focus on a specific question. If you have any questions, we will have a booster session, obviously, before the exam. So if you want to ask me anything about this leading up to the exam, please do. If not, good luck, and I will see you after half term because I'm going to do another one for paper 2.